Okay, so this is the demonstration regarding the SQlite database which we are using in the Android. So in this demonstration, I am going to create a table called employee which has two columns. One is the employee number and the next one is the employee name. So the employee number contains the ID, so or we may call it as employee ID, that will be better. Then this is for the employee name, where the employee ID is primary key so that we can avoid the redundant data, and the employee name, it is a sequence of characters. So the data type should be worker. Since it is worker, the size must be given. The 100 means maximum 100 characters we can store. So now let me start a new Android Studio project. So I am going to name it as employee info system. So now click next, and here I am mentioning the minimum SDK as AB15, that is the ice cream sandwich. Next, here I am going to take an MD activity, click next, then activity name. Here if you want we can customize, otherwise leave it. I am not going to touch anything. Now click finish. Now you can see that the project is getting created, and here the Gradle is the building system. So now the project is opened, and this is our XML file. Okay, now I am removing the default text view, that is the hello world. I am going to set some set of buttons here. So I'm going to take some OK button here, and this button is going to add some data into the SQlite database. For that I am going to change the text of this button, that is called label. I'm going to say that it is of add, and here I'm changing the ID to add button so that we can easily remember that ID. And next, below to that I am going to add a second button which is labeled as remove, and here the ID I am renaming it as remove button. Then I am going to keep a third button, that is to display. So here I am changing the label to display, and I am going to rename the ID as display button. Now you may look at the screen. We have three user interface components. One is add, second one is remove, third one is display. Now we are taking its activity file. Either you can go for activity subclass or app combat activity. Now I am going to declare three references for these buttons. One is add, second one remove, and the third one is display. So I am declaring the reference variables button, add, remove, and display. Now we are going to find all these buttons, that is we have to create the object from this XML file by using the method find v by id, as you know. So add button reference equal, do the necessary typecast button, find v by id r dot, id dot add button. Like that you can do for remove equal find v by id r dot id dot remove button. Here also we have to do the necessary typecast, that is to button. Like that get the display object r dot id dot display button. Here also you may do the necessary typecast. So now we have the three button objects. Now the next step what we are going to do is, when you click this add button, an event, as you know that an event will be generated, and this event will be handled by the event listener. So to handle the event by the event listener, we need to register this add button with the event listener. So register the add button with event listener. For that, add dot set on click listener, then new on click listener, the code is generated. So this method will be automatically invoked when we click the add button. Like that we are going to register remove button with event listener. For that, remove dot set on click listener, new on click listener. So now this on click method will be invoked when we click the remove button. And next we are going to register with the display button. So register display button with event listener. For that, display dot same thing, set on click listener, new on click listener, recording is generated. So this on click method will be invoked when we click display. Now we are going to see the database handling class. As I have told you that when you click add, the data should be inserted into the database. Here the data should be removed from the database. Here we are going to retrieve the data from the database. So for handling the data, we are going to create a separate Java class. For that, you may go to this project perspective and right click over the package here, select new, say that new Java class. So this class I am going to name it as database handler, where all the data manipulations are going to happen. Now you may click OK. And here this database handler is a special class, because we have to say that this extends a standard class called SQlite Open Helper. And now the SQlite Open Helper is an abstract class which contains two abstract methods called onCreate and onUpgrade. So we have to override these two abstract methods. So here how will you override those two abstract methods? Here you are able to see some red color. It shows that there is some error, and you may see this one red color bulb, that is the error indicator. Select it and shows implement methods. So it shows that this onCreate and onUpgrade we are going to override. Select OK. So what code we have to put in the onCreate is, we have to put the code to create the table when you are running this app. So how will you create the table? Now, to create the table, we have the SQL query like this. For example, create table, employee ID, and followed by employee name with its relevant data types. So for that, we can use the SQlite database reference. Using the SQlite database reference, we can call the method execute SQL, then copy this SQL query and put it inside. It is a plain SQL query, as you can see that. So initially when the onCreate method is automatically invoked by the framework, it checks that the table is created or not. If the table is not created, only then this line will be executed. Or we can say like that, the onCreate method will be executed only if the employee table is not available. And later in future, you may upgrade your database by removing some column or adding some column, or you may change the version of your database. At that time, the on upgrade method will be automatically invoked. So generally we may put the code like this: drop that available table and recreate the table. For that, again we can use the SQlite database db.execute SQL, and to drop the table, this is the SQL query. So just copy it, within double quotes put it, drop table if the table employee is existing, like this. So after dropping, we have to explicitly call the onCreate method. To call that, again use the SQlite database reference dot onCreate. Directly we can call onCreate, then pass that SQlite database reference. Now, because the onCreate method is a same class member, we can directly call. It is not by using db dot. That is a small mistake. Fine. Now, the next step is there is one more error. We are going to fix that error. What is that error? It shows that create a constructor which matches the super, because the reason is here our database handler class is a subclass of SQlite Open Helper. So now it contains only the default constructor. The default constructor contains a super call which has no parameter, but here there is something different. So when you click this, you can see that what's happening. It shows two types of constructor, that is two forms of the same constructor. You may select the first one and say click OK. And you can see that the super, context, name, factory and revision. So this part we will be discussing little later. Leave it. Now, as I have told you that the purpose of database handler class is to manage the database or interacting with the database. That is why the name is assigned as database handler. So we can add the data into the database. So now I'm going to write the code like that: void add data. So I'm going to put some documentation. The purpose is to add employee into the table, that is employee table. The first step is we have to get the database in the writable mode. So how will you get the database in the writable mode? We can say that by using the current object. So this represent, you can see that the current class instance, which is a subclass of SQlite open helper. So and call this dot get writable database, and we can see that its return type is SQlite database. Say that db equal this dot get writable database, and the next step is prepare the data to be written into the table. For that, we will use a class called content values. First step is we have to create an object for this class, new content values. Once the object is ready, we can insert our data, which is to be inserted into the employee table. And as you know that employee table has two columns. One is employee ID and the next one is employee name. So how will you stuff this data into this content value object? Now use the content value object, call the method put. We can see the syntax. Put, the first part is key. So some key we have to put. The key is our table column field. For example, employee ID or employee name. So now we are going to mention the key first of all. The key should be within double quotes as it is mentioned as string data type. So employee ID, EMB ID, it should be same. So the spelling must be same. And what must be the employee ID? I am going to say it as 101. So employee ID is ready. Now we have to put employee name also. For that, values dot put, we are going to say that the column name, employee name, followed by some name, for example Prince. So now for the first row, we have the content values object with some valid data which is inside that object. Now we have to insert the data into the database. For that, already we got the database in the writable mode in the reference db. So now we have to call db dot insert table name and the null column hack and the content value object. So now we are going to explore about this insert method. The first argument, that should be the table name within double quotes. The table name, as you know that this is employee. So I'm just copying it and keep it here. And next, I am going to pass a value called null. If we don't mention here it as null, then if the row is completely empty, that will be inserted as one row in your table. That we have to avoid by saying null. So if the second argument is null, no empty row will be inserted into the database. Then the third argument, that is your content value object. For example, values. So once the value is inserted, we can close the SQlite database by saying that db dot close. So this is to add the data. Next we are going to see how will you retrieve the data. For that, I am going to say that this method returns a data type of class string data type. So string get data. To generate the documentation, type slash to specify the documentation slash triple asterisk and press enter, and you can see that we can say that what does it return? It returns we can say table values or table result. So what is the purpose? Purpose is to retrieve the table content. Now, so it is about reading the data from the database. So we have to open the database in the readable mode. For that, current object, that is this dot get readable database, and store it in a reference of type SQlite database. And now, using the SQlite database reference, we can execute the query by using the method called raw query. So the importance of raw query is here we can pass our plain SQL query, and here it is about the selection argument if you are using the where clause. So raw query, I am going to say that select asterisk from our table name is employee, and if there is no where clause we can say none. And this raw query method, we can see that it returns an object of type cursor, and you can see here a cursor object which is positioned before the first entry. It means the select asterisk from employee. If there are two rows in the database in the table employee, the whole thing will be retrieved and the cursor will be pointing above the first row. That is about the cursor object. So that reference we can store it in a reference of type cursor. So once the cursor object is initialized like that, we have to now push the cursor to the first row. As I have told you that when this line is executed, you will be getting the full rows of the employee table, and initially cursor will be pointing to the row before the first row. We can say the cursor is pointing above the first row. Now we have to push the cursor down to the first row. I repeat, when this method is executed, cursor is pointing above the first row. Now we have to move the cursor to the first row, and it can be done by the method called move to next. It is a boolean method, and if there is no data there, it returns false. Then after reading the first row, we have to move the cursor to the second row. Again we can use move to next. So that will be a while loop iteration or for loop iteration. So I am going to use while loop, while cursor dot move to next. You can see that. Move the cursor to the next row. This method will return false if the cursor is already past the last entry in the result set. It means there is no more row in the resultant. So now at present we are in the first row because the cursor is moved to the first row by calling the method cursor dot move to next in the first iteration. Now in the first row or in every row there are two columns. The first column is the employee ID and the second column is employee name. To access the first cell in the first row, we can use the cursor object dot. There is a method called a getString method, and to access the first cell, pass the integer value 0. It returns a string information or string data. I can say that string ID equal cursor dot getString. Then like that we can get the name of the employee like the same cursor dot getString of 1. So in every iteration we'll be getting every employee's ID and name. So whole thing we have to append and that should be returned. So for that I am going to create a new string object whose name is result, empty string object like this, no data is there inside, and we will say that result plus equal id plus, we'll put some spacing also, colon plus name. Then after the first iteration the second row also should be appended, but to the new line. For that we'll add a new line character here, and finally this is going to return that particular result. So once this whole read operation is over, we can say that close the database which is opened now in the readable mode. So to close it, db.close. Now go back to the main activity. We are going to, and here you can see that we have three buttons: add, remove and display. For remove we didn't code till. We are going to check for add and display. Now from the main activity, when you click the add method, we are going to insert the data into the database. For that we have a method here which is called add data in the database handler.java file. So this method should be invoked from main activity, and as you know that it is a member of the class called database handler. So now we have to create the object of database handler. Using the object of database handler we have to call add data. So now I am going to declare a reference variable of type database handler outside the onCreate method of main activity. Database handler, a reference variable, and this reference variable is initialized in the onCreate method like this, new database handler. Now here there is an error. The reason is, already we have seen here, it has a constructor with some 4 arguments, but here we are trying to invoke the constructor with no argument. So we have to pass some arguments. Now we are going to explore about what are the types of argument we need to pass. As we see that this is about the context. The context of your activity we have to pass. So the first argument, so I'll put in separate lines, get the application context. That is the first argument. The second argument it is expecting, that is about the name of the table. As you know that the name of the table is employee. So I'm just copying it, and this will be pasted in the form of string representation. And the next one, this is about the cursor factory. If you are not using any customized cursor factory, or you can say that if you are using only the default cursor, keep it as null value. The null value shows that we are using the default cursor. And the fourth option, that is about the version of your table or version of the database. So here I am going to mention that version is 1. So here you are passing the context of the activity, and here you are passing the table name, that is employee. Here the null indicates we are using default cursor, and the next value it denotes version number, which is a numerical value. Now the database handler is, or the database handler object is ready. Using that object, we are going to call the method add data from the class database handler. For that, we have this onClick method. Here we are going to put it. Database handler dot add data. So here this will insert one row in the employee table. And later when you click the display button, we are going to retrieve the data. So for that, using the database handler, we are going to call the method get data. As you know that it returns a string that is a resultant of your generated table content. So I am creating a result object like this, and finally we will toast it. So we can verify that this is created or not. Toast, make text, say that get application context, and we can go for the resultant of the result to be displayed and specify it is of short duration or long duration, and finally say show. Unless you call show method, the toast data will not be displayed. Fine. Now we are going to check it. For that, let me start the Android virtual device emulator. So now I am going to create a new virtual device. So let it be Nexus 4. So Lollipop or any version which is available, feel free to use. So I'm going to say that. Okay. We can customize the name like that, ABD name, Nexus. We can say that, for example, I'm going to name it as my Nexus. Some name we can put it and select finish. And we can see that my Nexus is created, and now in the actions feed, select the start button, it will launch the ABD. Okay. So the device is getting ready. So meantime we look at the code once again. Now in our main activity we have 3 buttons, but only for 2 buttons we have the meaningful code, that is add and display. In the add, we are invoking the add method of the database handler. In the display, we are calling the method get data of the database handler. So these are the 2 things we are going to check right now. So okay, the emulator is getting ready only. Okay. The database handler, where we are interacting with the database. So here interaction means we are adding the data into the database, as well as we are retrieving the data from the database. And here you can see the specialty of this class is this is a subclass of SQlite Open Helper, and it provides 2 abstract methods on create and on upgrade. So these 2 methods must be overridden, and on create method will be automatically invoked by the framework if the table is not created, and on upgrade will be invoked only if there is some version change of the database, or if there is any removal or addition of column into the existing database. Now my emulator is ready, that is my virtual device is ready. Now we are going to test our app. So I'm going to run the app. So now it is running. As you know that in the add data we have only now one row 101, and the name associated name is prints. So let us check that. So yeah, app is ready. I am clicking the add button. Okay, there is some error. So we are going to debug that error. So here there is an option called error. We'll check it, and we can see that in the database handler.java in the 19th line there is an error. Okay, it is about the SQL query. I copied from the notepad, so the character is changed. So I have to delete it and put the normal single quote. Here also I will replace it single quote. So you should be very careful. So let me deploy the app once again. Click add. Yes. Now the app is not getting crashed. It means it may be a successful operation. We'll check it by clicking the display, and we can see that 101 prints is coming. We'll add one more data now. For that, go to the database handler.java, and in the add data, here as you know that the employee ID is a primary key, so there should not be a duplicate data here. I'm going to name it as 102. I'm naming it as let it be bright. Fine. So now we expect two rows of data. So let us check it. Okay. Now the old app that will be removed from the virtual device, and the new APK will be installed. New app will be installed. Now we click the add. Now we are going to check what is the display color. We are getting those two rows. So it is about the add and display. In the next demonstration, I will illustrate about remove with display. That's all. Thank you.